Hello, my name is Olivia, and I am 44 years old. During my mother's funeral, a tense atmosphere emerged when my mother-in-law arrived with a smile. Casually, she mentioned that my home would now belong to her son. As she explored the rooms, considering which one she might claim, she hinted at taking over one, saying, "I wonder if this room would be suitable for me." I politely corrected her, explaining that I was the one inheriting the house. Unperturbed, she argued that since I was married to her son, everything I owned also belonged to him. "So, in a way, this house is my son's, right?" she said with a grin. Her insensitivity to my mourning was stark as she cheerfully suggested we start getting along better, implying that moving in was imminent. My frustration grew as she seemed oblivious to my grief. "Why bring this up now? Can't you see this isn't the time?" I thought to myself. This house, filled with cherished memories of my parents, felt threatened by her unreasonable claim. Amid these challenges, I recalled my journey. I'm a 44-year-old who had almost given up on marriage after turning 41. But life took a surprising turn when I met James, my now husband, who is 5 years my junior. We connected through a mutual acquaintance, and he always respected my views, including our discussions on where to spend our honeymoon. Although he initially suggested Europe, he happily agreed to my preference for the Maldives when I brought it up. However, complications arose when my husband mentioned his mother's desire to live with us due to his father's declining health. Despite understanding her difficulties, we had agreed before marriage that we wouldn't live together. I reminded him of this, and he promised to discuss it with his mother. Throughout these interactions, it became clear that I needed to stand firm to protect my family home from becoming just another asset claimed by my mother-in-law. My husband, recognizing my concerns, agreed to support me in ensuring our home remained a sanctuary, untouched by unwanted intrusions. Meeting a wonderful person always brings joy, yet there's a pang of regret that haunts me. My father passed away 4 years before I got married. He never saw my wedding, nor could I reassure him about my future. My father was a disciplined executive at a small to medium-sized enterprise. I admired him deeply for his dedication and ability to provide for our family comfortably despite the modest scale of the business. This respect only deepened as I began my career as an office employee, understanding firsthand the challenges of the workplace. 3 years into my marriage, my mother also passed away. During these difficult times, my husband was incredibly supportive. "Are you okay? Maybe you should rest a bit," he'd suggest, always looking out for me. During the funeral, which we held at our family home, unlike many modern funerals held in facilities, we maintained a personal touch. I was comforted by my husband's presence, grateful for his understanding and care. However, the mood shifted when my mother-in-law, Grace, arrived. She expressed her condolences, which I acknowledged with thanks. Our relationship had been cordial but distant, as we hadn't lived together and only interacted occasionally. During the funeral, Grace approached me, her demeanor unusually cheerful, which felt out of place. She thanked me for helping with the funeral, noting how smoothly everything had gone because of my efforts. Then, quite abruptly, she said, "The funeral is over now, isn't it? Let's drop the formalities." I was initially taken aback, having thought her earlier kindness was genuine. She then began commenting on how splendid the house was. Despite my protests about some areas being untidy, she dismissed my concerns with a wave, saying, "Don't fuss over the details." Then, boldly stepping further into the house, she declared, "My son will inherit this house. I wonder if I should take this room." I hesitated, trying to process her words and intentions, but it was clear that her earlier compassion was merely a facade. Her true intentions, to lay claim to my family home, were now starkly apparent. During a tense conversation in my family home, I reminded my mother-in-law that I was the one inheriting the property. With a smirk, she responded, "I know your parents had no other children, and a wife's belongings are her husband's right. So this house essentially belongs to my son, doesn't it? Her comment left me exasperated as I questioned the legitimacy of her claim. With unsettling cheerfulness, she suggested, "From now on, let's get along better," and confidently announced her plan to convert one of the rooms into hers. Alarmed, I asked, "Does this mean we'll be living together?" Without any hesitation, she confirmed, "Exactly. With such a beautiful house, it would be a shame to leave rooms empty when two people can comfortably live here. Plus, I won't have to take care of my husband all by myself." This conversation occurred shortly after my mother had passed away, and my mother-in-law's insensitivity only fueled my growing frustration. Why would she make such comments during such a sensitive time? Just then, my husband overheard our exchange and intervened. "Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the right time for such discussions," he scolded. Unfazed, she retorted, "Why make such a fuss?" My husband firmly insisted she leave and escorted her out, apologizing to me afterward. "Sorry, my mom can be unreasonable," he said. I appreciated his support, replying, "It's fine. Thanks for handling it." However, as we began to move past the funeral and discuss the future of my family home, I noticed a subtle difference in my husband's approach. 12 days after the funeral, we talked about potentially moving out of our cramped apartment. "This apartment is getting too small. Shouldn't we consider moving back to my parents' house?" I suggested the move, and my husband agreed. "Yeah, you're right. With the possibility of having kids and needing more space, it's better than squeezing into this tiny place." But then, he hesitated before adding, "Well, then we should start preparing for the move." As we delved into the details, he revealed something unexpected. Considering the spacious house and all the empty rooms, I thought maybe my parents could move in with us. I was stunned. "Are you suggesting we live together?" Recently, I had noticed a change in my husband. Despite previously appearing to prioritize my opinions, I now wondered if he had just been agreeing with me to avoid conflict or if he was becoming too influenced by his mother. His growing willingness to accommodate her wishes was challenging my perception of him as a supportive partner. The mere suggestion of cohabitation made me question his true stance. Despite my clear objections, he seemed to waver, often appearing to side with his mother. "Haven't I made it clear that we won't live together?" I reminded him. His usual response was, "But Mom keeps insisting." I brought up how he had confronted her at the funeral. "You opposed living together then, didn't you?" He conceded, "Yes, I was upset about her barging in, but that doesn't mean I'm completely against the idea of living together. I just didn't think such a crucial decision should be made hastily at the funeral." Although he had initially seemed to take my side, it was becoming evident that his inclinations might align more with his mother. More frustratingly, he seemed to avoid making firm decisions, as if maintaining neutrality absolved him of taking a stance. "I'm firmly against living with someone who intruded into my parents' house during the funeral and presumed to claim a room," I asserted. "Please make sure your mother understands this." Reluctantly, he replied, "Why are you so bothered by it?" "Fine, I'll let her know." My perspective on living with my in-laws had shifted dramatically after witnessing my mother-in-law's behavior. The idea of sharing the home my father had built, a place filled with cherished memories, with her was now unthinkable. This was compounded by my husband's lack of firmness. When he did communicate my stance, my mother-in-law challenged me directly. "Why are you opposing living together in such a spacious house? You're James's wife now, and his father and I are practically your parents too. Why such strong opposition?" I reiterated my refusal, explaining the challenges I faced managing things on my own. She accused me of abandoning them, but I reminded her of the practical reasons we had discussed before. Despite feeling sympathy for my father-in-law's health issues, I knew that cohabitation would overwhelm me. If living together were ever to be considered, it would require a drastic improvement in both my husband's and mother-in-law's attitudes toward my boundaries, something I doubted would happen. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me heartless. Then, one evening, I was surprised to find my husband rearranging our living room. Curious, I asked, "What are you doing? Is this for storing moving boxes?" He replied, "No, I'm making space for 2 beds." The mention of 2 beds immediately filled me with dread. Cautiously, I inquired, "Are your parents coming to stay?" To my dismay, he said, "No, they're moving in today." The news hit me hard. Despite my clear objections, my husband and mother-in-law had decided on cohabitation without my consent. Why is this happening? I asked, my frustration growing. He explained, their lease is up, so we decided they'd move here instead of renewing it. It'll be cramped with 4 of us, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it for a little while. Distressed, I reiterated, that's not what I meant. Why is cohabitation even on the table? I've told you before, I don't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and assumed she could stay there. He promised to talk to his mom, then added, "We'll be living together from now on, so please try to get along." Annoyed, I asked, "Why do you prioritize everything your mom says?" He tried to clarify. "It's not about prioritizing her. I listen to both your opinions and make judgments." However, it was clear that when it came to his mother, he couldn't resist her influence. I had always seen him as a kind person, but alongside his mother, he became someone else, someone who was inadvertently forcing me into an unwanted living situation. As we welcomed my in-laws into our already cramped apartment, my mother-in-law quickly began complaining about the living conditions. I apologized for the sudden adjustment and assured them we would manage until we could move to a larger space. Although my father-in-law, David, seemed polite, I soon realized he was inclined to follow my mother-in-law's lead, becoming yet another yes man to her whims. Just days later, she asked me to run an errand, to buy a medicated patch for her. A small request, but one that added to my growing list of frustrations. As my in-laws prepared to move into my parents' home, the situation became unbearable. Faced with the prospect of sharing a home with them, I felt a desperate need to take control and protect my parents' legacy. My mother-in-law, unaware of what was coming, was openly excited about the move, looking forward to the space and comfort she assumed would be hers. But unbeknownst to her, for 12 days, I quietly made my own preparations, determined to protect the sanctity of my childhood home. Then, I made a drastic decision. I officially renounced my inheritance, securing court approval to relinquish my rights to the property. When I announced my decision, I kept my explanation simple. This house holds immense sentimental value for me. I couldn't bear the thought of you living there, so I've decided to let it go. I'd rather keep it as a beautiful memory in my heart. My mother-in-law was livid. What kind of madness possessed you? Even if you didn't want the house, you could have sold it for a fortune. Why just throw it away? I remained calm. Selling it would only mean you'd end up relying on that money next. I wanted to make things clearer by removing myself from the equation entirely. Her fury was immediate. We moved out of our previous place for this. What are you doing? How will you make this up to us? I stood firm. I have always opposed cohabitation. You forced this situation on us without a real discussion. So, I took a stand. The revelation stunned both my husband and mother-in-law. Their faces paled, they were speechless. My father-in-law, caught in the crossfire, looked bewildered. Then, I pushed the conversation further. "James, I've been thinking about getting a divorce. What do you think?" He stammered, caught off guard. A divorce? Before he could form a coherent response, his mother snapped, "James, you should divorce this ridiculous woman immediately." I had expected her reaction. But this was a test, to see if my husband could finally make a decision for himself. James hesitated, mumbling a weak response. His silence said everything. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. Fine. Divorce seems like the only option. My father-in-law attempted to intervene. James, it can't be helped. Your mother is insisting. James finally spoke, albeit reluctantly. Well, you seem to want a divorce too. Maybe that's for the best. Even now, he wasn't choosing for himself. He was simply following his mother's lead. It was clear, he had never truly been my partner. Very well, I said. Let's proceed with the divorce. That night, I packed a small bag and checked into a budget hotel, knowing there were urgent matters to handle the next day. I took half a day off work to return to the courthouse and finalize everything. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me, furious. What is going on? I just found out that the house is becoming yours. She must have learned through the estate division process. Yes, I confirmed. The house is mine. Her accusations came fast. You forged documents. You tricked us. I remained calm. Why would I forge court documents? Everything is legitimate. Then why is the house yours? You were supposed to renounce it, she snapped. I explained, right after submitting the renunciation application, I withdrew it. You see, renouncing an inheritance isn't final until the application is processed, which takes about a month. During that time, it can be retracted. I never actually gave up the house, I just let you believe I did. She was speechless. I continued, I used the threat of divorce to see how James would react. If he had shown even a shred of hesitation, if he had fought for our marriage, I would have reconsidered. I would have told him the truth about the house. But things unfolded differently. Her mind quickly shifted to money. Fine. But since the house was acquired before the divorce, it should be considered a marital asset. That means you have to sell it and split the money, right? I had anticipated this. Actually, no. If we had purchased the house together, then yes, it would be a marital asset. But this was an inheritance, and inherited property is exempt from division. She was grasping at straws. What about James's share of the division? I remained composed. We were only married for a few years. The shorter the marriage, the less likely inherited assets are divided. The house remains mine. Enraged, she hurled more insults, calling me selfish and heartless. But I held my ground. I'm protecting this house because it holds precious memories of my parents. I don't want people like you living there. If you have further complaints, take them up with a lawyer. After that, the divorce proceedings moved faster than expected. It seemed my mother-in-law was urging James to finalize everything quickly. Regardless of her motives, I was relieved. I had not only freed myself from a toxic marriage, but I had also safeguarded my father's home from people who never should have been there in the first place. After I moved out, my ex-in-laws must have struggled with their cramped living situation. Despite my absence, it wasn't enough space for them. Eventually, my former mother-in-law began looking for new housing. It was no longer my problem. I had one. However, their age posed challenges in passing rental screenings. Eventually, my ex-husband managed to find a small single-family home for them. Though it was a downgrade in size and likely came with a higher rent than their previous apartment, it at least provided them with their own space. He took on the full responsibility of supporting his parents, facing a difficult road ahead. At first, my former mother-in-law had been thrilled at the thought of moving into the large house my father left behind. But reality forced her to settle for something far smaller, a stark contrast to the grand future she had envisioned. It must have been a disappointing turn of events for her. As for me, I embraced a new chapter in the home my parents left behind. It feels warm, almost as if they are still with me, their presence lingering in every corner. Here, I am preserving their legacy and the memories we shared. This new beginning is not just a fresh start, it is a time of healing, reflection, and honoring my parents' memory in the peace of their beloved home.